When people talk about horror or folk horror, the 1973 version of The Wicker Man with Christopher Lee tends to be at the top of the list, for most anyway. It's not because it is unsettling or aesthetically occult, but because it feels disturbingly plausible. Beneath the masks and the sacrificial climax lies something that many occult films completely fail to grasp. Religion is not abstract belief. It is social engineering, agricultural timing, sexuality, hierarchy, fear, theatre, and power wrapped together into a living system. Then there is the Nicolas Cage remake, which attempts to modernize the story but fundamentally misunderstands much of what made the original powerful. The 2006 version is louder, it's more visually aggressive, and obsessed with conspiracy aesthetics, yet paradoxically less believable as an actual functioning pagan society. So, comparing the two films from an occult and folkloric perspective becomes incredibly revealing because it exposes the difference between authentic folk religion and Hollywood's cartoon understanding of paganism itself. But before we dive deeper into that, I want to quickly thank Rev Kai for supporting this channel and today's video, which is sponsored by them. Now, Rev Kai is a specialized astrologer and diviner with over 25 years of experience. They provide a strategic blueprint for your life using little known medieval and Renaissance astrological methods gleaned from recently discovered manuscripts. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, Rev Kai offers regular forecasting for the month or year ahead, so you always know exactly what's coming. They even specialize in deep dive services like identifying your innate magical skills and uncovering the name of your natal genius. So, for major events like business launches or weddings, they use electional astrology to find your window for success. And if you've never known your birth time, which not a lot of people do, Rev Kai's rectification service can find it for you, giving you an accurate map to work with. They also help people build sustainable connections through ancestral veneration and spirit communication, sorting through lineage and tradition with confidence. Now, Rev Kai is offering a special 20% off for my viewers. So visit revkai.com and use the secret password Midnight Hair. I'll put it in the description below just so you get it right. But use that when you book your initial consultation. So stop guessing and start navigating with precision. Right, so back to The Wicker Man. The 1973 film understands that folk religion survives because it embeds itself into everyday life. Summer Isle is not simply a village doing rituals. The entire island operates according to a mythic framework. Agriculture, sexuality, education, song, social roles, and seasonal timing are all integrated into one worldview. That is exactly how historical folk religion actually functioned. One of the most important occult aspects in the original film is the use of sympathetic and seasonal magic. The islanders believe fertility must be maintained through ritual participation. This mirrors real-world folk customs found throughout parts of Europe, particularly Celtic and pre-Christian agricultural rites. Fertility was never merely about human reproduction. It was about crop cycles, livestock health, weather stability, and communal survival. Modern people often romanticize this, but historically failed harvests meant starvation. Ritual was literally survival. Lord Summerisle's theology reflects this beautifully. He openly explains that the island's prosperity came from reviving old gods and older customs. Whether the gods are objectively real is almost irrelevant. What matters is that belief itself became a structuring force that unified the community. From a practical occult perspective, this is extremely important because many magical systems function psychologically, socially, and symbolically long before one even discusses literal spirits. The May Day celebration in the original film is especially rich in authentic folkloric material. The maypole dance, animal masks, hobby horses, fertility songs, and processions all derive from genuine European folk customs, although heavily stylized for cinema. The maypole itself carries obvious fertility symbolism, the phallic axis around which the community weaves ribbons in a ritualized binding dance. Historically, these celebrations marked transitions in seasonal energy, particularly the movement from spring into the fertile abundance of summer. What the film captures extremely well is the uncomfortable reality that older folk customs were often erotic. Modern sanitized paganism frequently strips this out, but historically, sexuality and fertility were deeply intertwined. The landlord's daughter attempting to seduce Sergeant Howie is not merely temptation for shock value. It reflects the ancient magical idea that repression weakens vitality while participation aligns one with the living current of nature. In practical folk magic traditions, bodily functions were rarely viewed as separate from those of the land and spiritual power. The film also understands initiative inversion. Howie enters the island believing himself morally superior. He is a rigid Christian policeman representing law, empire, and rational order. Yet, on Summer Isle, he becomes the outsider, the heretic, the sacrificial fool. This inversion mirrors many real ritual structures that social roles temporarily reverse during festivals. Carnival traditions across Europe often allowed for temporary disorder because controlled chaos reinforced communal cohesion afterward. From an occult perspective, the most fascinating element is the sacrifice itself. Human sacrifice in European paganism remains historically debated, exaggerated in some cases by hostile Christian chroniclers, but symbolic logic behind sacrifice is ancient and widespread. The idea is straightforward. Something valuable must be offered to restore balance between humanity and the unseen powers governing nature. The original film treats this with terrifying seriousness. The islanders are not cackling villains. They genuinely believe the sacrifice is necessary because the crops have failed. That sincerity is what makes the ending horrifying. There's no mustache twirling evil, there is collective conviction. Folk religion becomes dangerous precisely because the entire community participates. This is where the original film succeeds as occult horror. It understands egregore formation, though it never uses the term. An egregore is a collective psychic structure formed through shared belief, ritual repetition, symbolism, and emotional investment. Summer Isle itself functions as an egregore. Every song, mask, dance, and custom reinforces the psychic architecture of the island. Even if one rejects literal magic entirely, the psychological force becomes undeniable. Now, the 2006 remake abandons much of this subtlety. Instead of a functioning folk culture, we get a vaguely New Age matriarchal cult populated by suspicious women glaring at Nicolas Cage while ominous music plays. The remake replaces folkloric immersion with paranoia aesthetics. The result is less believable and far less occultically interesting. While many modern pagan and spiritual movements do explore goddess traditions and female-centered spirituality, the film simplifies these ideas into a more rigid social structure built around suspicion, control, and exclusion. Historically, pagan cultures were incredibly varied and often blended masculine, feminine, and nature based powers in complex ways. The original film feels more grounded because its religious system comes across as an organically evolved folk tradition tied to agriculture, seasonality, and communal survival rather than a society defined primarily through gender dynamics. The bees themselves are a good example of symbolic potential being mishandled. Bees absolutely possess rich occult symbolism. Across numerous traditions, they represent divine order, communication between worlds, soul transmission, fertility, sacred monarchy, and collective intelligence. In ancient Greece, priestesses associated with Demeter and Artemis were sometimes linked symbolically to bees. Medieval folklore treated bees almost as spiritually aware members of the household itself. But the remake never develops this meaning coherently. The bees become visual branding rather than functioning symbolism within a believable magical worldview. Compare this to the original, where nearly every custom feels embedded into the island's social and agricultural life. The remake also lacks the musical ritualism that made the original so effective. Songs are incredibly important in folk magic traditions. Repetition, rhythm, and communal singing induce altered states. They reinforce memory and synchronize group emotion. In many pre modern societies, songs themselves carried magical functions, preserving charms, transmitting myths, coordinating labor, or marking sacred time itself. The 1973 film uses music almost constantly, making the audience feel trapped inside a living tradition. The songs are cheerful, erotic, playful, and sinister all at once. That tonal ambiguity mirrors real folk customs where the sacred and ridiculous often coexist. The remake largely discards this and becomes a conventional thriller. Another important difference lies in the portrayal of Christianity. The original presents a genuine clash between two fully realized religious systems. Sergeant Howie is not merely prudish, he sincerely believes in Christian salvation and moral law. The film gains power because both sides possess conviction. The remake weakens this tension considerably. Nicolas Cage's character is less a devout ideological opponent and more a traumatized detective stumbling through a conspiracy. As a result, the story loses its metaphysical dimension. From a practical occult perspective, the original film also demonstrates how ritual creates altered environments. Summer Isle is psychologically enclosed. Outsiders immediately feel destabilized because normal social cues no longer apply. This mirrors real initiatory environments where separation from ordinary reality weakens previous identity structures. Costuming, masks, music, sexuality, feasting, and public ritual all contribute to this liminal atmosphere. Liminality is one of the most important concepts in folk magic and initiation. The liminal state exists between identities, between seasons and worlds. And Mayday itself is liminal, between spring becoming summer, life pushing toward fullness. The islanders weaponize liminality against Howie until he psychologically loses footing. The original film also reflects something many modern occultists ignore. Traditional folk systems were collective, not individualistic. Modern Spirituality often revolves around personal empowerment, manifestation, or self development. Historically, folk religion centered on communal continuity. Rituals existed to maintain the tribe, the village, or kingdom. Individual desires came second. And that is why the sacrifice works symbolically. Howie is not killed out of sadism alone, he is consumed by the collective need for survival. Again, horrifying but coherent. Ironically, the 2006 version feels more modern precisely because it is more individualistic. Everything centers on personal trauma, manipulation, and spectacle rather than communal cosmology. The island feels like a cult compound instead of an organically evolved folk society. There is also a practical lesson here for contemporary occultists and witches. The original film demonstrates that symbols gain power through repetition and cultural embedding. Summer Isles rituals work psychologically because the islanders inhabit them continuously. Their songs are not weekend spirituality. Their worldview shapes education, relationships, labor, and seasonal behavior. That does not mean we should romanticize the society portrayed in the film. Quite the opposite. The brilliance of the original Wicker Man lies in showing how beauty, joy, music, fertility, and horror can coexist within the same sacred framework. Folk religion is not automatically benevolent simply because it is natural. Nature itself is indifferent. Crops fail, animals die, winter comes. Ancient religions understood this viscerally. The final image of the burning Wicker Man remains one of cinema's most powerful occult symbols because it combines multiple archetypes simultaneously. We have sacrifice, purification, soul imagery, kingship, destruction, and rebirth. The Wicker Giant becomes both execution device and ritual offering. How he dies inside a symbolic god form constructed from the collective will of the community. The remake reproduces the image, but without the same symbolic weight. It becomes a spectacle rather than culmination. Ultimately, the difference between these two films comes down to one thing. The 1973 version understands folklore as a living ecosystem of meaning, while the 2006 version treats it as aesthetic decoration for a horror plot. One feels like stepping into an actual surviving pagan worldview. The other feels like Hollywood wearing a pagan mask. And that brings us to the end of this month's movie reviews, or examinations, should I say. And I thought it was good to actually compare these two. The Wicker Man is one of the best known movies as far as folkloric horror goes, anyway. So, anyway, I'll leave that to you, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye bye.